So I had to redo this video, so if I sound slightly annoyed, forgive me please. So this is a video on how the UK failed to stockpile crucial PPE. This gives you a bit of a timeline. This is based on the Panorama documentary, in which they investigate, what happened and why there was such a low amount of PPE. So let's go through this slowly. The government failed to buy crucial protective equipment to cope with the pandemic, a BBC investigation has found. There were no visors, there were no gowns, visors, swabs, or body bags in the government's pandemic stockpile when COVID-19 reached the UK. NHS staff say they're being put at risk because there is a shortage of protective equipment, which we know to be true. The government said it's taken the right steps and is doing everything they can to increase stocks, which is the government's tagline on this: is we did the right thing, we followed the science, blah blah blah. Maybe we should do some bingo on this, on government things that the lines they keep using. It'd be quite fun. The investigation by Panorama found that vital items were left out of the stockpile when it was set up in 2009, and that the government subsequently ignored a warning from its own advisors to buy missing equipment, following the science bro. The expert committee that advises the government, the new and emerging respiratory virus threats and advisory group NERVTAG, which is a cool acronym, recommended the purchase of gowns last June. Government obviously didn't do it because we know that we didn't have any when this thing hit. Gowns are now currently one of the shortest in supply in the UK. We know that healthcare workers are wearing aprons because they don't have any gowns. They are now difficult to source because of the global shortage of PPE. The BBC fails to mention the fact that some warehouses were stocked with PPE, but the government didn't take it from them, probably because they'd rather have Burberry make it. Don't know why they would do that, but the government are idiots. Doctors and nurses are complaining there is a shortage of life-saving FFP3 respirator masks. So I think these are the masks that stop you catching it. So if you wear a mask, it stops you from spreading it, but not necessarily catching it. So obviously the mask is there to help stop the spread of it, but it won't stop you catching it, unfortunately, which is a point I've just made twice. There were 33 million on the original 2009 procurement list for the stockpile, but only 12 million have been handed out. The government refuses to explain where the masks are gone. I think they've either sold them or lost them, to be honest. They're the only two possibilities I can think of. Or they've given out to their mates, or they've just kept them for themselves. Because they've lost more than they've actually handed out, which is insane. The government spokesperson said there was a limited demand for the masks coming through the supply disruption line, which is one reason they haven't all been distributed. So the government's basically saying that I think the government's saying they haven't been asked for the masks, that's why they haven't been handed out. But we know that NHS staff have been washing and reusing the protective equipment, so we know this is probably a lie. They asked that gowns were a recent recommendation from the advisory group June. They've known since June, and would be procured for the stockpile build-up alongside all the other necessary equipment, which you failed to do. Panorama has spoken to a number of NHS insiders about PPE who wish to remain anonymous because they know their managers at the NHS and the hospitals they work at will berate them for talking to the media because they're probably getting orders from someone else above them to keep the stuff stum because it's making the government look bad. There's a complete lack of transparency within the government. They are creating a panic and they don't know if they can supply us, so we're scrambling to get it elsewhere. So we know that in an article I'm going to cover next week, that the government this week the video will be covered, or next week, sorry, I'm losing my mind, that the NHS staff workers are having to procure their own goods. We know that we covered the story of the guy who makes visors, that I think one surgeon bought 75 visors off him because the government just weren't supplying them. So there's the visor thing. Swabs, obviously you need that for testing, and body bags for the dead. So if you don't have enough body bags, hell no, I don't know what the hell you do in that situation. Professor John Ashton, a public health expert and long-standing critic of the government, told the programme that the lack of preparation was breathtaking. The consequence of not planning, not ordering kit, not having stockpiles is that we are sending them to the front line, doctors, nurses, other healthcare workers and social workers without the equipment to keep them safe, he said. A government spokesman said the stockpile was designed for a flu pandemic and that COVID-19 is different, with a high hospitalisation, still a word I can't say, hospitalisation rate. They said swabs and body bags were not recommended by NERVTAG historically, but eye protection was, so the stockpile contains safety glasses but not visors. Government Minister Victoria Atkins, who said, "We're very, very sorry to hear of the Panorama report. We're sorry that you looked into us and you fact-checked us and you called BS on us. So sorry, so sorry." Like every other country in this world, the virus is unprecedented. I draw some sort of issue with the line, it's unprecedented because we've had like viruses before and dangerous pandemics before. So I don't know. It's just it's just a thing to say to protect themselves, I guess. We're doing our absolute best, but your best isn't good enough, so you should probably forfeit and just quit and get someone else who knows what they're doing to address those needs. We will continue to do so throughout this crisis. You've bungled the crisis exponentially, so I hope you do better than you've done before. Panorama has investigated changes to guidance on what PPE NHS staff should wear. So in January, COVID-19 was designated as a high consequence infectious disease. The decision was made in consultation with a group of British experts. A health and safety executive evaluation of PPE published in 2019 had recommended that healthcare workers should wear a gown, FFP3 respirator mask, and a visor when dealing with HCIDs. These recommendations were in the existing guidelines. So when dealing with HCIDs, you should wear a gown, FFP3 respirator mask, and a visor when dealing with anything called a HCID essentially. But on the 13th of this year, the government downgraded its guidance on PPE and told NHS staffers they were safe to wear less protective equipment and basic surgical masks in all but most high-risk circumstances. Panorama understands that on the same day the government took steps to remove HCIDs from COVID-19 from the list of HCIDs. So on the 13th, they got the guidance straight away. They did it. They took COVID-19 off the list of HCIDs. But the experts who had recommended the coronavirus be put on the list in the first place were not consulted. Instead, they asked a different group because this is probably the answer they needed because they didn't have enough PPE because they didn't stock it because they weren't prepared. Panorama has discovered that the ACPD was only asked to consider the matter on a list of any other business on the 13th of March, so they did not take this seriously at all. The committee backed the decision to remove COVID-19 from the HCID list, but only because of the lack of PPE. So my theory is that if they didn't take it off the list, then a lot of medical professionals wouldn't have been able to do their jobs because they would not have the protective equipment required because it's classed as a HCID. It was another 6 days before Public Health England announced that it was no longer considered a HCID, which it seems to be a high consequence infectious disease. But their argument is that because the mortality rate isn't high enough to be classed as that. I don't know. How high does the mortality rate have to be classed as a HID? 20, 30%? Do you need a third of people to die when they catch it for it to be a HID? So basically the guidance for PPE now is an eye protection, so goggles. This is the minimum: goggles and a respiratory style face mask, a gown, and gloves. So we know that gowns are in shortage, so they have to wear aprons. The face mask, typically, if it was a HID, it would be an FFP3 mask, but obviously they've taken it off that list for whatever reason, maybe because they didn't get enough. So you can wear any kind of respiratory style face mask, so there'll probably FFP1 if such a thing exists, and eye protection instead of wearing a face visor. It's been downgraded to goggles because they don't have enough face visors, even though there's a guy in Liverpool who produces them, but the government didn't buy them. Whatever. So overall, a government spokesperson said that COVID-19 was taken off the list because it had a low mortality rate, and that there is now a greater clinical awareness and a specific laboratory test for the virus. So because they can test for it, it's been taken off the list. So strange. They added that the committee's advice, this is the second committee they used, the ACDP. So that was the committee they asked. They added that the committee's advice would no longer be considered as an HCID, was basically entirely based on scientific considerations. Like we didn't have enough masks and stuff. This was an unprecedented global pandemic. Again, we've had really bad pandemics in the past, so I think this is just the government tagline to say that no one could have prepared for this. The world's never seen this sort of thing before, even though we've seen worse pandemics with way higher mortality rates. I think SARS was way worse in the obviously in Far East Asia. This is unprecedented. The government has been working day and night to battle the coronavirus. 25 days a week, 40 hours a day. 600 days a year to solve this thing. And we're here to protect the NHS, even though we didn't get the stockpiles and we've been underfunding them for for about 10 years. But we're doing our best, guys, with the hand that's been given. And what we can guess from this article is the fact that because the stockpile hasn't been added to, I guess, since 2009, they haven't had enough stuff from the 2009 list, even though the population's grown actually massively since then, is the fact that, it's down to Cameron, May, and Johnson that those three things happen. You can say Johnson's a bit more innocent in this, but he was a cabinet minister at one point, and you do have what's called collective responsibility. But the fact is that Cameron had 5 years to add to the stockpile. Also, May had about 3 years. They didn't do it. They were all cabinet minister. May was cabinet minister at the time. Jeremy Hunt has a lot to be responsible for. He's too busy, attacking junior doctors, instead of actually dealing with a stockpile that we need now. Imagine the hero Hunt would have been if we actually had enough for a stockpile, but we don't. And so they're all responsible for it. Shouts out to Gordon Brown for actually setting this thing up, which I don't know what was kicking off in 2009. I can't really remember that far back. But, shouts out to him for actually making a pandemic stockpile list. Shouts out to the Conservative government for not actually listening to it at all. They blame the Labour Party for the economic crash, which in part it was responsible for. But they won't say, oh, thanks guys for actually having, letting us have, 33 million masks, which we've handed out 12 million of. Imagine we didn't have these masks. Imagine how screwed we would be then. So yeah, I'm going to leave it there. Like, comment, subscribe, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.